Assumptions are supposed to maybe guide us. It's kind of, there's a difference between I have a conclusion and I'm looking for data that supports my conclusion versus I have a hypothesis. I'm looking at the data and then I'm able to change my conclusion or create a conclusion based on what I receive.
Hey, it's Brad, and boy, am I happy you're here. If this is your first time, I'm really glad you found us. You're not going to be disappointed. And if you've been here before, welcome back. This is Pain to Performance. Let's jump into today's conversation. So you meant well. You said the right thing, and somehow it still landed wrong. They got hurt. You got defensive. The whole conversation went sideways, and you walked away thinking, how did this happen again? Now, what if I told you there is a gap that lives inside every conversation you have? A gap between what you meant, what you actually said, and how the other person received it. And inside that gap is the reason you keep fighting the same fights with the same exact people. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Patricia Timmerman. She's a psychotherapist, an author, and the creator of the IAP model, a framework that has helped people stop assuming and start communicating. And she is going to show us why most arguments are not about what we think they are actually about. Let's get into it. Patricia, welcome to Pain to Performance. I have to tell you, when I read your work, I got really excited because there's so much overlap between what you do as a psychotherapist and what I do as a neuromuscular therapist. You work on the mind, I work on the body, and we both keep finding things that essentially are the same exact conversation. And I'm so excited to be able to have you on today to be able to kind of talk about some of these things. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be able to have this conversation with you. Thank you for having this platform.
Of course. And I'll tell you what, this is exactly what this platform is for. So let's go ahead and dive into it here. So Dr. Timmerman, you're a psychotherapist, you're an author, and you developed your own communication framework. That's a lot of stuff. So can you take me back to the beginning of everything? Like, what pulled you into psychology in the first place? And what was the moment you knew this was your work?
Let me tell you, this field chose me. I didn't choose it. It's interesting because like my entire life, I was geared towards medical school. My AA was in biology. When I went to NYU, my bachelor, it was pre-med. I actually did intro to psych and intro to political science, said no to psychology. And my bachelor's is in political science. And I was going to go to medical school. I didn't feel ready. So in the interim, I'm like, I'll do my master's. Let me think of something. Let me go into teaching. I love teaching. I saw this curriculum at Barry University on mental health and marriage and family. And the only way that I can describe it is that it spoke to me. And I'm like, okay, let me go into it. Let me do this. I always liked the black and white, and I think psychotherapy is the world of gray and understanding that everything is contextual. I always tell my students in therapy, we're not looking at a photo. We need to look at the movie, because when we look at a photo, we make a lot of assumptions. But when we actually understand the movie, we gain context as to anything, right? How we're thinking, why we're thinking things this way. So this profession chose me. I was actually just going to go to medical school after finishing my master's. And as I did my soul searching, I realized, nope, I want to further my education, and led to my PhD, which led into work with so many amazing people and into the development of this theory.
That is so cool. What a really awesome kind of pathway to this. So what I understand, what I just heard was you pretty much thought you knew what you wanted to do, said, oh, wait, never mind, that's not real. And then you ended up going back to it at the end and have now built this extremely successful career. You've been able to talk with some of the top minds and you've created your own framework. I kind of want to go back to something that you said, though, where you said you're not a black and white person. You like the shades of gray. And you're saying that psychotherapy or psychology, things of that sort, really tend to work in the area of gray. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about that? Did you always operate in the gray, even as in childhood? Or was this something that as you got older, you decided to start challenging things?
Well, I used to be very black and white, right? Like what is and what isn't. I'm very numbers. I think I was the only one in my cohort in PhD whose research was quantitative and not qualitative, because I like numbers. Numbers don't lie. I look at my life as a study.
Okay.
And I look at data. I like accumulating data. What are behaviors that have worked? What are things that work? What are things that didn't work? How come it worked? How come it didn't work? Going into psychotherapy, I had to learn to get comfortable with the gray, right? It's understanding that, you know how people say there is one person's truth, the only person's truth, and then the truth. There are facts, and then we have our own interpretations of the facts, of the data in front of us. Some interpretations are proportionate to what most people would experience. Some interpretations would be disproportionate to the norm, quote unquote, but are proportionate to that individual's life experience. Right. So that's when I say, like, the concept of gray is understanding and giving people grace up to a point. Right. I've had recent experiences where I have a tendency of giving too much grace. And I need to also respect my own boundary and understanding I can give grace at my own detriment. Does that make sense?
It sounds a lot like, 100%. And I think a lot of people also have that same exact issue. I don't want to speak for anybody else listening, but I can speak for myself. I will overgive to a lot of people. I will allow individuals to push a boundary that I normally wouldn't allow myself to even push. So you saying that it could not be more spot on. So you said that you were enthralled with numbers and that you did more quantitative rather than qualitative research, which I find highly fascinating. I'm sure somebody can look up your dissertation just like I did. But what did your early years as a therapist teach you that you couldn't have learned in school? Because there's always that gap between the textbook version and what you actually see in the room.
I love that you asked the question. By the way, I do have to pause and validate you on something that you naturally do, which is one of the communication strategies just outside of the IAP model, but that I've included in the IAP because it's so important. When you repeat back to me what I said and what you understood, that's called reflecting. And I love when I always teach my clients to do that. There's a science to reflecting, right? When I'm reflecting, I heard what you said, so I repeat back what you said, what I understood from what you said, and give you the option of saying, yes, that's right, or no, that's wrong, right? Because we are in a space where I can just express what I understood because I already heard you, and it's right on. So I need to validate you for that because I think it's beautiful. And anyone who comes out of this conversation is like, oh, that's reflecting. I can use this in my sessions or with my couple or anyone that I'm talking to. Okay, I'm sorry. Now
that makes me feel really good. You totally clocked it, Dr. Timmerman. Yeah, you totally clocked that. You're right. It's a portion of what you got to do as a host, you know? So, but I'm really interested. I do want to understand how things are different. Did you maybe actually that's a really good jumping off point did they teach you reflection in textbooks, and how is it actually practiced in real life?
So yes, when I was studying, it was in the sex therapy class that I took. I'm not a sex therapist, but I took a course on it, and it was teaching imago therapy. And part of it was you sit in front of, if you're doing a couples therapy, in front of your partner, and then you ask what the complaint or the issue is. And all you're allowed to do is reflect back. And then after the other person says you're correct, all you can say is there more, until there is nothing else. And then you shift. So yes, I was taught that. I never necessarily did it in that space because sometimes I have, but sometimes I haven't. One of the reasons that I haven't necessarily is because there's a balancing act when you're working with couples or when you're working with units. And you want to make sure that no one feels left out or feels that you have an alliance with one and not the other. And so I want to make sure, especially in virtual therapy, when somebody can just click off, that does not happen. But you're right. There are many things I've been in this field for almost 15 years now. So it was a little while back when I was going to school.
It's a good point.
But one of the things is rapport building. I use being in the book. I have friends of mine that go like, oh my God, you go through that too? Because I put a lot of anecdotes. Like I experienced things. The IAP came because of my communication with my husband and me noticing patterns, but it's being open in sessions and creating rapport. There's nothing wrong with me being able to share a little bit, is as long as it is purposeful. Whereas before, I guess you were taught like not to. Even I share about my sexual orientation, my gender identity, right? I want whomever is with me to be able to feel comfortable in sharing. And I think when I give name to certain things, it becomes easier for you to know, okay, you're a person I can talk to.
Absolutely. And I think you're nailing something here that I also see inside of what it is I practice, which is massage therapy. Now, any one of my clients will tell you, I am not that normal massage therapist that it stays quiet. You're not coming in for a spa type therapy. You're coming in genuinely because you have something going on with you. Now, a lot of people have their guards up. Almost every person has their guard up. I'm a strange person. You don't really know me. You have no reason to trust me besides my credentials and maybe a couple of Google reviews that you've looked through. You have no other reason to trust me. And whenever I start actually having a dialogue with these patients, getting to learn about their life, sharing a little bit about mine, because in school, they teach us the whole idea, and I'm sure they do the same thing for you guys, of the permeable, the semi-permeable boundaries, things of that sort. And I'm that person that I'm a little bit more on the semi-permeable boundary for a lot of things, because if that means that I can get that client to relax or get them to let their guard down, now at that point, their body's going to let that guard down also. And for you to be doing that for your clients also makes me feel really good, feeling like I'm not breaking anything such as ethical standards go, right? Because it is a very fine line in some cases. And in your book, Why Are We Fighting, right? You kind of discuss a little bit of that, right? I'm curious, what made you decide to write that? Was this the thing you were tired of explaining one client at a time, or like what kind of happened there?
So I actually, the more I think about it, it's so interesting that communication is what I ended up going to, because even when you're going back to the dissertation, my dissertation was on suicide grief. It was not to do with communication, right? I worked in the world of suicide grief, from the 1-800-SUICIDE to facilitating for survivors of suicide grief or loss for like 10 years. And I always thought that if I was going to like go into something, it would be that. But then this kind of showed up. And one of the things that you said is I noticed myself repeating the same thing. I noticed patterns. The reason I wrote the book, and even the person who was guiding me in the publication of it, she asked me the same question. I said, I want it out there. Like, it's actionable strategies. There are things that you can do. This is a tool. When you're using the tools, it works. When you stop using it, it stops working, of course. But I just wanted people to have this information. Like, these actionable strategies are not difficult. They are simpler things that when you hear it, you're like, of course this is a thing, but you don't know until you know.
Of course. Yeah.
That was the reason for writing it. It's not like I'm tired. I love talking about it, but yeah.
But it seems, and I think what's important for the listener to know as well, is that this book comes from experience with you. It's not you trying to be a new name in the psychology realm. It is you speaking about experience, a framework that you have realized and decided to actually write about so that way other people can actually utilize it. And I just really want the listener to hear something as well, is Patricia's not just a clinician, you guys. She's someone who looked at years of patterns and built a system to fix them. That is a different kind of work. And that is taking what you see in the room and turning it into something other people can use. And Dr. Timmerman, that is a gift because a lot of people don't have that. And I'll tell you, I've read a couple of books about like business strategy, marketing, all these other things. And what people are writing about is what worked for them. What worked for them, not a framework for you to actually be able to try to replicate the results. So I want to go to the mind-body piece of all of this too, because this is where your work and mine collide heavily. You talk about the relationships between the body and the mind, epigenetics, neuroplasticity, I think manipulation of the body to change the mind as well. So can you walk me through how you got there? Because that is not where most psychotherapists land.
I love the relationship between the body and the mind. The body is it's physical. It's here, like I can touch it. I can't touch the mind, right? I feel like the mind is still things we are learning and we're covering. The first Matrix that came out, when you're like in the Matrix, because your mind is in the Matrix, whatever happens there, your body feels. So if you died in the Matrix, you would die in real life, right? However our mind thinks, our body follows. Silly example, but I noticed that whenever I would get bored, one of the first things, whenever my mind would tell my body, you're bored, one of the first things that I would do is this. The moment that I went backward is like my body gave permission for me to then start doodling and stop paying attention. So
check out. Yep.
One of the things I started doing is anytime that I would do this, I would bring myself up. Right? I did not want
so
my
now you're
body...
manipulating. Yeah, oh, keep going.
No, but you're right. I'm now manipulating my body. Sometimes it's difficult for us. We have involuntary intrusive thoughts. Many times it's involuntary intrusive thoughts. I say it's involuntary because who here voluntarily talks down about themselves? But we just voluntarily have oftentimes it happens. I can share with you this. It was in 2025. So now I was looking at the findings in epigenetics and neuroplasticity, right? So in the epigenetics is understanding that positive emotions give a temporary energetic genetic expression, right? So you start feeling better when you're feeling loved, you feel restorative. Whereas negative emotions, feeling neglect, feeling isolated, is a temporary genetic expression that is injurious to the body, causes vulnerability. I also was looking at findings in neuroplasticity, which is essentially saying my brain does not fact check. As my mind is creating this like narrative, my brain is just like typing it away and typing it away. So unless I shift it, my brain is typing, and the more like animated I get, the more animated I'm going to continue getting until I kind of pause. So I had this experience where I felt triggered by past experiences, right? Like I messaged my husband, he didn't message back, and experience with an ex from way ago made the lack of response be a catalyst for intrusive thoughts, right? And so as I'm going through intrusive thoughts, my mind is like typing away whatever it's saying until I pause. And I remember looking at the microwave and I'm like, okay, epigenetics, let me hug myself so I can have this temporary genetic positive expression. Let me power pose. So when I open up my chest, my testosterone goes up and cortisol goes down. Everybody who's listening, pay attention. Whenever you're not feeling good about yourself, does your body concave? When the body concaves, cortisol goes up, testosterone goes down. There's a wonderful TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, Dr. Amy Cuddy, on the subject. Please look it up. It's amazing. And then I started saying things out loud because I wanted my neuroplasticity to work on that. So I started to saying, this narrative is my anxiety talking. What are factual affirmations? My husband is really bad with his phone. He just really is. I know that he does not answer messages because he doesn't see them. And the moment he sees it, he's going to answer because there's a body of evidence that shows that. So my intrusive thoughts are not based on reality. So I was doing factual affirmations, and that helps my body kind of de-escalate from where it was going. And it made the typing, the brain is typing. It now started typing on facts as opposed to the anxious assumptions. Does that make sense?
And that's such an interesting way of thinking about this. So I actually had another therapist on, and I don't remember how far back, but we were talking about the death spiral that our brain does. And it's all from a trigger of something that's happened in the past, which is exactly what you're talking about here, about how all of this kind of gets kicked off from just one simple trigger. And then all of a sudden your brain starts creating these connections that aren't necessarily true, but seem logical in the moment. And that's also, we could possibly start getting into a different style attachments here, but I think that's a completely different conversation for a different time. Everybody knows that I'm currently working on my anxious attachment style. I'm actually slowly getting more secure. Guys, it does work. Therapy is amazing. But you just said something that really sticks with me, though. You said you started looking at how to manipulate the body in order to manipulate the mind. So you're talking about power posing. You're talking about exercising, muscle tension release. You're talking about going into our Superman chest is what I call it, right? And I'll be honest, whenever I do that, I do feel better. I do feel better just instantly. And so for the person listening who has only ever been told to, quote unquote, think positive or change the mindset, what does that mean? And how did you discover it works?
Okay. So when we talk about like positive affirmations, for example, oftentimes most people, I can't say everybody, I actually know one individual whose tendency is often to think best case scenarios, but most people, including myself, think worst case scenarios. Now, the level of what a worst case scenario is to one as compared to other can be very different. Right? I noticed that my worst case scenario is really not the worst case scenario. When I hear from other people, I was like, oh, dang, I didn't even think about that possibility. So because we are often already having negative affirmations or non-factual affirmations in our head, for balance sake, we want the positive affirmations, right? So if you're going to be your worst enemy, you also want to be your best friend. The reason that I said the word factual affirmations is because sometimes I may not be able to look at a positive, but let me look at a fact. Let me look at something that I know to be true. So my husband isn't good with his phone. That is a factual thing. It's not a one time or a two time. It is part of a pattern. I tend to over explain. That is actually in one of the activities I've done for the end of the year was, what do you want to leave behind in 2025 and bring with you into 2026? And I said, over explaining is something I want to leave behind in 2025, and not putting myself first, but thinking about myself in a relationship as much as I think of others is what I want to bring into 2026, which I have. Right? Once identify the what, then you can figure out the how. And then we break it down and go with the easy step and all that good stuff. But the reason for the positive affirmation is a cognitive
I don't mean to interrupt you, but what I want to check on something really quick.
Sure.
I have always thought that positive had to outweigh the negative for you to feel good. Does that make sense? But I think what it is that you just said was that they just have to balance out. So for every negative, there should be a positive. We don't have to have the scale tipped in one direction to feel good, right? You're just saying that the brain doesn't understand quantity, it understands the quality. Is that what I'm understanding?
In a way, yes. So I'm going to go somewhere else for a second and kind of bring it right back here. So have you heard of Dr. John Gottman?
Okay. I have heard of Gottman, the Gottman method. Yes.
Yes. Love John Gottman, Julie Gottman. They are amazing. In his study, in his findings, one of the things that he learned is what he calls the emotional bank account, is that for every one negative interaction, you need 5 positive interactions to outweigh, because the negative is heavier, right? So when we're talking about the balancing act of the positive, I call it a cognitive balance, is understanding that our internal worst enemy tends to speak heavier or speak louder, right? So our positivity or our different way of looking at the same thing needs to be more intentional, because we involuntarily already tend to be our worst enemy. So we need to intentionally be our own best friend. I believe there's a balance between the concept of positive and negative. Somebody's positive all the time usually feels like they're not being genuine. Somebody's negative all the time, it's like they're living with sunglasses on and they can't see beyond that darkness. So it's being able to understand, okay, my sunglasses are here, but I can also lift it, right? And which type of thinking serves me best? If self-criticism helps me propel forward and create change, then use it. But if I notice that self-criticism is no longer being useful, but is being harmful because now I can't do anything, then let me shift and look at what is that I'm doing well. One of the things that I put here in the book is what I call instructive compliments. Culturally speaking, depending on the culture, some people will look at compliments as fluff. I grew up in a culture where if you're doing something well, if you got A's in school, for example, as a kid, you're not doing more than your obligation. But if you didn't get a good grade, it was disappointment and punishment. So I gave a lot more weight to complaints and criticism and to mistakes than I did to the things that I've accomplished. However, there's a purpose to compliment. So criticism tells you what you're doing wrong. Instructive compliments tells you what you're doing right. Because what you're doing right, you can then keep on doing and only focus on the areas that actually need to be changed.
That's really interesting. And my brain's having a hard time trying to understand that. Can you give me an example? Can you give me and the listener an example really fast?
So this is like an easy example to go to. My husband, I swear, he loves me, I always use him because he's so...
I totally get it. It's easier to kick the family dog. It's what I tell everybody. Just go ahead, kick the family dog. I get it.
So whenever my husband would cook, he loves cooking. He cooks amazing well. Whenever he cooks, if you tell him that the food is good, but you don't say anything else, that to him means nothing. He would actually prefer if you told him it wasn't, because then he's looking for something to grow on. However, an instructive compliment is when I say, hey, the amount of salt was perfect, the texture was amazing, the spiciness was great. Maybe I would add a little bit more of this, so he knows what to maintain, and then whatever else to change. Or if I may, one more.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, go ahead.
Even with my employee, when we talk about, because this IAP model is not just for couples, it's focused on communication in spite of relationship. And with my employee, whenever we do like feedback, if I'm only talking about the things that you need to work on and not what you're doing well, it can be discouraging. The sandwiches, you start with something good and then the meat is like, what needs to be changed. And if there's nothing good to talk about, I can't just create things out of thin air. But if I let you know the things that you're doing well that don't need to be changed, one is an acknowledgement of what you are doing or even the things that you have tried to change. And in the same time, I can be more specific on areas for growth and you become more motivated.
That's a wild concept. When I shouldn't say it's a wild concept because it makes sense. But what I'm saying, the reason why I say it's wild is because it's so simple that people don't think about it, you know? And I'm looking back on several of my own relationships and why I feel that some of those relationships may be better than others. And I'll tell you, Dr. Timmerman, I'm a little bit like your husband. I'm that person that would rather be told all the things that I'm doing wrong for me to be able to improve rather than people to tell me, oh, you did that. Like, I already know I did, and I know it's probably good work because I tend to work very hard at the things I do. But how can I make it better? And so in those relationships that I'm looking back right now on, I'm realizing that the ones that I feel more fulfilled in are the ones that are giving me that feedback of what it is that you just called. I think you just, was it instructive compliments?
Instructive compliments.
And I'm realizing that that's the reason why things are better in those relationships, because that's what it is that I need. So I'm curious, does that work for everyone?
I haven't experienced a time when it hasn't worked. I will express like this. I would like to do a longitudinal study to turn this into best practice. I will say the times that people stopped using it, it has stopped working. But was it yesterday or was it this morning? I did an instructive compliment with my husband when we were talking. So this was yesterday night. I like to eat healthy food. I just found out I'm lactose intolerant. And so I tried vegan cheese and I really did not like it, even though I really enjoy vegan food. Like I like the taste is there, but the cheese was not for me. Sure. So we were having a conversation and I like to have healthy food, which makes it difficult oftentimes to go to places to like, you know, people's house or whatever to eat. But there has often been a judgment that I receive because I'm only doing a diet, because I want to be, you know, not because I actually enjoy it. And my husband will often say, no, she is crazy. Like she prefers to have vegetables as opposed to like French fries. She prefers to have a parfait, a yogurt bowl that is plain, non-fat, because she doesn't like the taste of fat in yogurt, than to have ice cream. And I told him, I don't know if you know that every time you've stepped in to say that, even though it sounds joking, I've felt validated. And I really appreciate it. And he's like, I didn't know. And I told him, so please keep on doing it because it's amazing. Like it really helps.
And that's where your relationship is growing. So I'm curious, like, I want to take this back to the mind-body perspective for a moment.
Okay.
So whenever you get those types of instructive compliments and people are sticking up for you and or what you feel they are sticking up for you and they're speaking your truth, then what happens in the body there? Do things kind of like, what happens adrenally, I'm assuming?
It's an interesting question, right? Because I can speak myself when I've received instructive compliments. I've felt validated, which made me feel good in the relationship and even about like the things that I'm doing, that my intentions sometimes are getting across and I wasn't sure if it wasn't, and it really is. So because I feel good about myself, it's kind of like working out, right? Is that emotional exercise or that activity, and you're seeing the product of your intentional exercise. It's actually like what you intended it to be. So I do think there is a lightness that we may feel like in our body, because that's what I've experienced. I haven't actually studied it, or as what I can say. And I wonder, it was not with instructive compliments, but there's another actionable strategy that's called the preamble, just because you asked about the body. So I want to give the example.
Sure.
One of the instructions, so there are two functions for my IAP preamble. The first function is when I tell you what I need from our interaction before we interact. So if I say, hey, I really want to vent. I do not, you please don't try to fix my problem. I'm not in a space where I can take it, but I really need to vent. Are you able to listen right now? And you're able to listen, but you know that I'm not expecting you to fix my problem. Versus if I don't say it and I just start saying the problem, oftentimes you're like, okay, what does this person want from me? They want me to fix it. Yeah. And then when you fix, what do? I get defensive because I wasn't ready for it.
Because that's not what I wanted or what I needed in that moment.
Yeah. And I remember, so I started doing the preamble with my husband. And I'm like, you can continue doing your thing. You don't even need to, like, I just need you to tell me that, and you ever so often just go, And we went traveling. We went and traveled to a friend's house. And as they were talking and I'm observing, she just came back from work. We sit down and we're talking. And my husband does the preamble with her. And he says, you just touched upon, I don't remember if it was like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or one. And it's like, you just touched upon that. Now I'm going to go for it. You do not need to pay attention to what I'm going to say, but I'm just going to go for it. And she's like, okay. And what I saw her do was this. She was like this. At first, you see like the contracted, like, oh my God, I need to pay attention to everything. She first did this. And then when he finished talking, she came back and started responding. And so I paused them after that interaction and I asked her, what was your experience when he did the preamble? And she said, I was really worried that I really needed to pay attention. And my worry over paying attention was giving me some anxiety that I was like holding or like not anxiety, but stress. When he said I didn't have to, I just relaxed. And in relaxing, I listened. And then I really wanted to respond because it was really interesting. So instead of having to worry about paying attention, I got to just naturally pay attention. So.
That's a really cool thing. And I'm actually sitting here thinking now in my relationships, if I do a preamble. And listener, I want you to think about this too for a second, because I think this is something that a lot of people are lacking and they are not doing, Dr. Timmerman. I think you are on like the precipice of something that is vital in society, is for us to be able to give the permission to not pay attention. It's okay. We don't always have to be 100% engaged. And I know a lot of people get upset about that. And I'm sure I'm going to get some angry emails here shortly being like, how dare you tell people not to pay attention to others? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is sometimes we tend to be a little bit more passionate about something than somebody else is. Like for me, I could talk about anatomy, neuromuscular therapy for hours. And I honestly, people laugh at me because I say I could talk to a brick wall. I really could. And I think that genuinely makes me a really interesting person. But in that same vein, I am actually realizing that I do a preamble a lot with a lot of people. And it's because, number one, I've had a lot of sales training. They teach you to do this in sales training a lot. They teach you to try to break down the guard, break down the misconception that something's important. Because whenever you break that down, people naturally want to listen more, because now they don't feel like they're going to miss something. And so whenever I go to talk to my friends about anything, I'll say, yeah, this probably isn't very important, but I really think that this is a very interesting piece of what it is that you just said. And then at that point, once I'm done, it also doesn't make them feel like they have to respond, Dr. Timmerman. They don't have to respond. And not everything you say deserves a response either. So I think that's what I'm saying. Society really needs to kind of start thinking about doing more preambles and allowing people to step back for a second and not feel the need to respond. Because I think that's really important. That sometimes we just need to say things to be able to continue forward. And doing that allows that person to feel heard, feel seen, all these different aspects. Then why not do that? So that's my question right there, Dr. Timmerman. Why do you think more people don't do this?
One, I don't think it's something that we've stopped to think about. We just tend to jump into the conversation without thinking about how the conversation goes. I don't remember ever talking about how to talk. I just kind of started.
Okay,
talking.
fair point. Fair point. You have a very, very, very valid point there. So do you think that this is something that will eventually catch on in society? Or do you think this is just for those like master communicators?
I mean, my hope is that it would, right? It's
Sure.
again, these are actionable strategies. They are things that we can implement. It's just like sometimes, like for example, in many conversations, we want to be heard. But the other person does too as well. And sometimes I want you to listen to my point of view and you want me to listen to your point of view. And so we keep missing each other. Right. And if I'm able to listen to your point of view, do what you do, which is reflect back. And then you're like, you know what? I feel heard. That's exactly how I feel. Sometimes even be able to say, that was absolutely not the intention of my behavior, but my behavior hurt you. So I truly apologize that my behavior hurt you. Right now, let's switch it around. So this specific thing, which is going on book number 2, it's called the post conversation. The post conversation was born from a relationship I had with this individual that she and our language was very different. Even though the two of us are speaking English, the way that we see the world and we see things are very different. And the post conversation meant, I'm a very visual person, so kind of go in this ride with me. It meant I'm coming into, after having this contentious space, I'm going to go into trying to understand your experience from that situation. So I'm going to jump in your roller coaster cart. We're going to go through your experience. What was it about it? How did you feel triggered? How did you reminded you of other things that you experienced and therefore you reacted in this way? Once we get to the exit, now what we are going to do is you need to be interested in mine too. So the reciprocity is required. Now we're going to jump in my roller coaster cart. And I am going to walk you through my experience, how I saw it, and how come I behaved in the way in which I did. The times when we've done that, going back to the emotional bank account, 5 deposits for every 1 withdrawal, we understood that there were times that we got reimbursed. Because they're like, okay, I understand that your intention was not hurtful, even though it was interpreted in that way. And it was interpreted because of my worldview and my experiences. So understanding that gives more grace to our relationship. I will also say that the moment that we stopped doing the post conversation, the relationship stopped being what it was. So that's when I say the IAP model and its tools only work as long as we apply them and we learn to apply them. Like I already kind of tend to speak in an IAP way. I evade the word you. I evade accusation. I speak about my experience. I do not mind apologizing if something is worthy of apology or if a mistake is made, but I can't do it all by myself, right? So both have to be open to it.
That is so cool that you just brought this up, because every listener knows I'm in therapy, so this isn't really that big of a moment. But in my therapy sessions, whether it be couples therapy or just individual therapy, I learned something called, and my therapist would probably hate me if I'm going to say this wrong, but I think it was called the feedback wheel or something of that sort. And that's exactly what you just described. Is you would talk about the experience objectively, then you would say what you thought, what you felt, and then at the end of it, you would finish with actions or something that you needed from the other individual. Then the other person would reflect back properly. So we're using all of these tools that you are talking about right now and that are inside of your book that are now finally documented. And then they would repeat back the same thing. And the thing is, as a person that's being spoken to cannot say a word. You have to listen. And I'm thinking that she's missing something in that now. And I think it needs to be called the preamble, right? Because we need to get that conversation ready to put that person on relax so that way they're willing to listen. Because it's really hard whenever you're dysregulated to want to listen. And that goes the same thing with body work, right? Whenever the body is dysregulated or the mind is dysregulated, anything that I do neuromuscularly is not going to stick. It's not going to hold. And that's why it's so important for us to be able to break down those barriers the moment that I first meet you. Some people are like, you're a lot. I was like, I am. But the reason why is because if I'm not enough, you're not going to calm down, you know? So we've been talking a lot about intention and action. And I think we're now talking about the perception piece of this, which is the I, the A, and the P of what it is that you're talking about. So can you give me a real example, possibly like a real conversation? Can you walk me through how the IAP model would diagnose what went wrong?
Yes, I think the easiest one that I go in is the one that whenever I talk about the IAP to somebody, it's where it kind of all started was in my relationship with my now husband, then boyfriend. We had just moved in together, and we had, I do not remember what it was. It was like an argument or a disagreement, and I left the room. Now, my intentionality behind it is to show my outrage, and I'm leaving because I want you to follow me, right? Because the expectation associated with my intention. See, you know what I'm talking about. It's if you follow me, it shows me that you care. Ergo, if you don't follow me, you don't care. Okay.
And now I'm even more mad. Yes.
And now I'm even more mad. And my husband did not follow me. Now, I don't remember what it was that made him come outside. Maybe like he heard me opening and closing the cabinets, like more if I cry. I do not remember. This is like years ago. But he came out, and I put my therapist hat on, and I'm like, why didn't you follow me? And he said, you created space. If you were me creating space, I would want you to respect it. So I respected you by giving that space that you created. I'm like, oh, okay. My intention was not clearly communicated through my action, and it was subject to interpretation. And you thought that you were interpreting in the best way possible for me, which was not the case. So one of the things that we learned is if there's an argument and he leaves, I give him space. If there's an argument and I leave, he follows. Because we learn what the other person wants. One of the beautiful things about the IAP is that it brings self-awareness, right? How come like I see things this way, I perceive things this way? What are my intentions? How am I clearly communicating them? Because I can only control myself. I can't control the other individual. And one of the things that I love is it causes us to check ourselves at times. Right? There's a worksheet that I call With Awareness Comes Action. So I call it WAKA. And it requires me to think of an instance where I did something, it went wrong. What was the behavior? What was the intention? And how did it get lost in translation? So if you and I are having a conversation, if I'm a live example, I went to throw a surprise party for my husband our first year together. And the reason for that is I love a surprise party. Only had one in my life, but I love a surprise party.
Me too. I love them too.
Thank you. We went to jiu-jitsu. We went to the house, we showered, and we're going to go out for dinner. And it dawned on me, ooh, does he like surprise parties? And so right before we left, I kind of told him, hey, do you like a surprise? And he said, no, I do not. So I said, okay, I need you to know it's not going to be just us at dinner. There are at least like 5 or 10 people that are going to be there. Right. And he's like, okay, I'm glad that you told me so then I can prepare myself. But with the WAKA, it makes me become aware, like, how come things went so wrong? How come people are reacting in a way that's very disproportionate to what I expected them to? Because it might not be a them thing. It might be a me thing, especially if I see that there are multiple people reacting in a way. My husband loves to say, like, if I am driving one direction and other cars coming the same way, I'm like, well, no, you're going the wrong way. But if I'm driving this direction, they're like 3 cars coming this way, maybe I need to check myself, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's so funny you say that, because there's actually somebody in my life that hates surprise parties. And birthdays are a big deal for me. Huge deal for me. Mine's the day after Christmas, so a lot of people tend to forget it. So I like to try to make other people's days feel special, you know? And so this person, though, the first time I met them said, and literally we were just friends at that period of time. They said, don't you dare throw me a surprise party, because their birthday was coming up. And because I told them exactly how much it was. So that communication was good. But I would have assumed that it would have been okay, kind of like you did. And then this person actually told me the story about the surprise. They've had one surprise party thrown for them, and it did not go well, is what I heard. They told me this story after I told them that there was a possibility that I was going to plan something, and they were like, don't do it as a surprise. So we were talking about that assumption piece here. You said the model helps curb assumptions. Why are assumptions so dangerous inside of communication?
Because we don't know if they are true or evidence-based unless we ask. Right? So remember, I'm going to go back to the beginning of our conversation, the concept of a picture versus a movie, right? When I said, like, I teach my students to do the black and white and the gray. When you look at a photo, you will make a lot of inferences based on your own experiences of life, your own way of seeing the world from that photo. When you watch the movie, you're then able to see if in the context of whatever was happening, if your assumptions are correct or not. Assumptions are supposed to maybe guide us. It's kind of, there's a difference between I have a conclusion and I'm looking for data that supports my conclusion versus I have a hypothesis. I'm looking at the data and then I'm able to change my conclusion or create a conclusion based on what I receive. The thing about assumptions is we don't often check them. And when I say them enough in my mind, they sound like facts. And it then seems very true to us, whether or not it is or it isn't. People tend to make assumptions of other individuals' behaviors. With this individual I was telling you about, a lot of the times when I would hear the assumptions from my behavior, I'm like, it didn't even cogitate that. Like, check, ask. Like, is this what you meant? Because that's how it came across. So an example I can give, and going to language barrier, like my father-in-law was speaking with a friend, and there's a word in Portuguese, agitado, which the literal translation would be agitator. Like, a person who is agitada is a person who's very exciting. When you come into the room, like, you bring energy. But if I say you're an agitator when you come into the room, in English, there's a negative connotation to that, right? So when I'm letting this individual know, like, hey, let's pause. Ask my father-in-law, what was your intentionality? He said the word in Portuguese, and then I got to translate. At first, that individual received it as, well, he knew exactly what he was saying. I'm like, no, he didn't. Right? There is a language barrier. So if you want to hold on to that assumption because that is from you, then you're not giving grace or flexibility. But then this individual is like, you know what? Okay, it was not intentional. It was supposed to be a compliment, but it came out
exactly
kind of like a slap.
And that's the whole idea of, like, intention versus impact, right? It really does make a difference. And that's why those communications are vital, and not assuming things, right? And if we do assume, that we actually come back and we follow it up to actually get that proper information back, right? It's that feedback loop. We have to have it, because if we don't use it, we're just going to continue to destroy every single relationship we have because we're assuming everything, right? So
for sure.
I know that we're kind of getting towards the end of our time here, and I want to make sure that I can try to give the listeners some type of actionable takeaway from today. So let's say someone is listening to this in their car right now. Okay. Maybe they had a flight this morning, or they just woke up incredibly anxious, or maybe it was both. I hope not, but maybe. And they just heard everything we just said. What is the first thing they should do? I'm not looking for, like, the whole framework specifically, but or any specific protocol, but I'm just trying to figure out, what is the first thing that they should do tonight?
First thing, pause. the power of pausing, because when that anxious space is a continuous conversation in our head that is happening, whether we're acknowledging or not. And so like, I often tell myself, like, I don't want to give energy to this. And then it starts again. I'm like, I already said, I don't want to give energy to this. Right. But if I don't talk to it, if I am a passive participant of my intrusive thoughts, everything sounds true. So become an active participant of your intrusive thoughts. Identify, what purpose are you serving me? So I can give you what I call the rule of 3 interpretations, right? Something happened that triggered the intrusive thoughts. Think about the data that you have. And then once you acknowledge, my first thought is maybe worst case scenario, your challenge now is to pause and identify 2 other alternatives, going back to cognitive balance. If the first interpretation or assumption is worst case scenario, for balance sake, think of best case scenario, and then identify a third possible case scenario. Once you have all 3, choose the one that serves you best. So if it serves me to believe, like, for example, I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know if I can right now. I'm going to put an example that I had. No, I got one. I had this friend that a while back, like, this was, I want to say maybe 4 years ago. I was with her at her job, and her professional supervisor was our like clinical supervisor in school. So we all have like a great relationship. But she's working under that individual, whereas I was just there talking to them. And as they were conversing about things, I gave my opinion. And then I noticed that this friend, all of a sudden, like, she disappeared for a minute. And because like I would message and didn't get anything back, my intrusive thoughts started coming. Oh my God, did I step over her toes in that meeting?
Sure.
Oh my God, what did I do? I can't believe, right? I had to pause and once at that point, because it started taking, all I wanted to do is call, but this person isn't necessarily responding. And so I'm like, what are 2 other interpretations? The first one is she's mad at me. I stepped over her toes. The second one, best case scenario, she's planning a surprise party for me and therefore she's not talking to me. A likely case scenario, she is caught up with work stuff and like maybe overwhelmed herself and unable to respond. Right. And so a message that I sent was, hey, I miss you. Give me a call whenever you can. And I want to say maybe like 2 days later, she called me. She's like, I've been slammed. I haven't been able to talk to anyone or do anything, but I chose the one that served me best. And I repeated it to myself. I breathed, like, breathe in, pause, breathe out. So then I was able to actually believe in the one that I'm choosing and let that guide my experience. Because again, whatever we think, our body follows.
That is such great advice. And you could not be further from the truth with this. And Dr. Timmerman, this has just been incredible. It really has. It has really solidified a lot of things in my head of tools that I've been given in therapy. Things that I'm doing in my life that I didn't realize were actually good. I just thought, I was like, oh, this seems to work out for me. So there's a lot of things in our conversation today that really, really, really helped me align with my mind, my body, and then to understand why it's actually happening. So thank you so much for coming on the show and being able to explain this framework and why it works. So before I let you go, where can people find you, your work, and the book that you're talking about?
So here, I'll show you the book so you know what you're looking for. You can find my book, and the audiobook is coming out soon as well, but you can find it at Amazon. My page is called advocate2create.com, and the 2 is the number 2. I'm huge with advocacy, talking about communication, finding our own voice, what it sounds like, how it's shaped. So it's advocate2create.com. And the rule of 3 interpretations, I have a free explanation and worksheet for it on advocate2create.teachable.com.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Timmerman, again, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's just been absolutely fantastic. So here's what I want you to take from today. Dr. Patricia Timmerman told me a story. Earlier in her relationship, she got upset and left the room. She wanted her husband to follow her. He did not. She got even more angry. And when she finally asked him why, he said, "You created space, so I respected it." Same moment, two completely different interpretations. And that gap is where every fight lives. She calls it the IAP model: intention, action, perception. And the distance between those three is the reason you keep having the same argument with the same people. So tonight, the next time your brain starts spinning a worst case story, pause. Give yourself 3 interpretations: the worst case, the best case, and the most likely case. Then choose the one that serves you. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate a subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And send this to someone you keep fighting with. You might be having 2 different conversations and not even know it. This is Pain to Performance. I'll see you next time.
Before we take off, one quick housekeeping thing. This podcast is for education and conversation only. I'm in no way a licensed therapist, doctor, wizard, and this show is not a substitute for care from a qualified professional. If something today made you think of someone you know, go ahead and do them a favor and send this episode their way. Pain is rarely a solo experience, and a good conversation is better shared. And if you're enjoying the show, make it official. Follow, subscribe, leave a review. It helps more than you realize and keeps this conversation going. Remember, the hardest part of Pain to Performance is learning how to listen. Now, I'll be here, same place, next play, and I can't wait to welcome you in.